Alright, so today I felt like making this, and we are going to talk about sketching. What is it, why do we do it, and why you're probably doing it pretty wrong. So for starters, I think it's really important when you're trying to practice sketching to be comfortable with your tools, right? However that may be. But your goals should be, and you should be able to do this with minimal effort and with minimal thinking to get lines, hard edges, where there is not much of a fade between the thing that you're doing, between the mark that you're making rather, and the mark that you're not making, that negative space. Do it however you feel like it, but what matters is that you can consistently get hard edges in the shape that you want. I don't like to use super hard edges, but it's nice to have them. The next thing you need is soft edges. These are the tricky ones. These are the ones that people spend forever on, and people who are just sort of have a knack for them, well, we get to hate them. But if you're going to try to make a soft edge, there's a lot of ways you can do it. And this is primarily why I use paint tool size, because I can use either an airbrush to get a nice soft transition and then sharpen it up on one side to go from one value to the other. And you can just finagle that as much as you want to get it to look the way you want. And so see, now we've got a nice sharp edge that looks decent. Another option is to use a hard brush and then a soft eraser to pull that edge back. And if you're going to be doing this, then it's wise to use what's called a temp layer. The idea being that you make a fresh layer above your old one, as you can see here on this side. You can combine them and make a new one with shortcuts inside. And you can also do it in Photoshop, but it's a little trickier to set up. But because if you use temp layers like that, then you can have a shape of any kind, right? And use a selection or just a fresh layer. So for example, here it is with a selection. And now I can block the whole thing in and then use a soft eraser on one edge to sort of get that to fade the way I want it. The problem with using that is that you get transparency, but we'll go into that some other time. And then you just combine them down, and now you've got your soft transition in the confines that you want it. I like to be looser because I think that workflow is faster and it just makes it easier to manage things. So I don't like to use the selection most of the time. I'll have my shape, then I'll just draw above it. And I use pretty much entirely soft brushes and erasers to get my hard edges. So in this case here, soft brush, soft eraser, hard eraser to make the edge hard. And because this is all on its own layer, it's not going to really mess with my lines. Oh wait, I didn't do it on its own layer. Lesson learned. Now if I do it on its own layer, then when I erase, it won't affect anything underneath what I'm erasing. And being able to do all of these things with minimal effort, with minimal searching, and when you want them to, where you want them to, is required for sketching. It doesn't matter what you're doing, even if you're doing boxes. Being able to do this quickly and efficiently will save you so much time in the long run for your simple shapes that you'll be able to do more. And that's why, in my personal opinion, quick sketching is more important than finished work as a beginner. Being able to put down the things that you want and get them correct, or at the very least get them wrong fast enough to where you don't have to spend years to have something to even critique, it is better. The next thing I want to talk about is my specific setup and how I do things. For starters, you may have seen me doing this here, where I'm smooshing the paint around, and this is just with the default Psy water brush right here. I have it keybound to V because I use it so much. It's a nice setup because you can pretty easily work with multiple colors if you want to. Right, they will blend together pretty easily. So here's like a high chroma, and here's a low chroma, and then you can simply take the water brush and get a nice soft transition with no finagling. But if you wanted, you can undo that and do it again with the same soft brush I was painting with earlier and just some color picking, right? And that actually gives you a more natural looking gradient or rather a more interesting looking gradient, because the saturations blend. The watercolor has a dilution function that can tone down your colors in a final image but looks nice for sketching, and it's quick. Right? The amount of time it took me to blend these two together was significantly longer with the airbrush than it was just simply with the watercolor brush down here. But as you can see, it sort of dilutes the color. So it's up to you how you want to do it. But all that really matters is that you find a way that's quick and efficient for you. So now that we've gotten the basics out of the way, and just a quick recap, and I'll put them up here in like a purple. Actually, let's do them in red, because they're important. You want to be able to get your fundamental marks. That's what I'm going to call them, because at the end of the day, drawing is primarily mark making. Whoops, I can spell. There you go. Fundamental marks. And those fundamental marks are a hard edge, a soft edge, a line, and that's really all you need. And with these fundamental marks, the next step comes in applying them properly. So, after you've got some fundamental marks, one of the things that's good to practice is just primitive shapes. It doesn't matter what they are. An exercise I did a lot when I was beginning was just an abstract organic shape, and Peter Hahn talks about this, and so does that dude who runs Drawbox, and I'm pretty sure Modern Day James also does it. But the idea is this is just a 2D shape. I can put it in any orientation I want, and it doesn't really matter because it represents a... you could, in theory, graph this with an equation. But to actually give it form, that's where the mark-making techniques come in. And the way I like to approach it, and this is something that Vilpu talks about all the time, is starting with your hard edge shapes and moving into soft edge shapes from there. So for example, if I want to define the form of this little primitive shape, I'll make a hard edge here, even though, as we all know, we've all drawn spheres, and if you haven't, you probably should. They have a soft transition, but if you start with a hard edge as your defining border, it helps you, I found that at very least it helps me mentally define what shapes I want to, like what shape I'm actually trying to represent. You see this a lot in manga where they mainly really just have black, white, and screen tones to work with. But once you've got these hard shapes that give you an idea of the actual surface of the object, right, you can see here that if I were to draw some rubber bands surrounding it, around this organic form, the shadows sort of expose this this form without the necessary lines. And if you use hard edges, one, it gets you practicing and thinking how you want to define it. It helps you be deliberate with your mark making. But the second thing is, if you can comfortably do both your hard edges and your soft edges, then it's as simple as softening your hard edges. And this is what traditional painters do all the time. They will start with like little squares of color. Ron Lemon talks about this on the Muddy Colors blog, and if I can be bothered, I will link it, but not until somebody asks. But the point is that being able to take these initially hard edges and soften them quickly and without too much effort is how you get to the actual process of making something look three-dimensional. That's how you make something look finished. There's a Discord server that I'm in, and recently the moderator posted an interesting little thought experiment, the idea that what we define as finish is really just how clearly something is reading, and that really is the truth. This, in theory, if I wanted to actually clean up some edges, could be considered finished, and for the purposes of sketching and learning, it 100% is. We now have a clear 3D shape that has form and that reads. Whoops, I forgot to combine the layers. And regardless of the orientation of the shape, the lighting angle is consistent, and the shadows that are on it give you an idea of what it's supposed to, like what these abstract 2D marks which is ultimately what all drawing is, and are supposed to represent in a 3D world. And if this seems like something beyond you, if you ever look at somebody's work and think, wow, his shading is really good, then this might likely be beyond you. A simple way to get there and a good plan of attack is just to skip the whole softening step completely, right? And what I was doing for the longest time, was start with your abstract shape, and I'm going to use a hard brush for this just to help clarify it. Start with any abstract shape will do. I want to just round these out just a bit. Pick a light source, and then use the bucket fill tool that can be found in every drawing software alongside your brush. Draw in an edge for your shadow. Right. And this is another example of using temp layers where you draw it above, and then once you've erased away what you want, you can bind it down. But use a temp layer, or draw the edge of your shadow shape where it's going to be, and then simply bucket fill the remainder. And one, it gets you this nice looking, if you do it properly and you have a good underlying drawing and understanding of form, it gives you a pretty minimalistic way to approach form, which looks nice, and that's how mangas do it. But just with these two little shapes, you can see that this is turning away from us. There's no softening at all involved, and you can go as wild as you want with your definitions of it. And the thing to be thinking about, and actually get on to the whole thing in just a second, but the thing to be thinking about when doing an exercise like this is that the shadows tell you more about what they are landing on than what is casting them. And in the case of form shadows, that is to say a shadow that is being cast by an object on itself, by nature of it being facing away from the light, is that they cast on themselves, and that your form shadows will help you define both the form of the object as well as give it some 2D graphical shape. And if I wanted to get a little more interesting with this, I may have an overhang. So how would I approach the overhang? Well, without even dealing with a line weight, you just make the bottom side a little bit thicker, because that's in the shadow, and then a little bit here. And now it's pretty clear that there is an overhang here, but more importantly, this little shape is, I want it to show what it's landing on, that is to say the curvature. I grab my airbrush again and show the rubber bands wrapping around this. The curvature of this here surface. And I can do the same thing here if I had some soft edges to work with, but because I don't, I have to be picky about where I'm going to place my my shadows. And doing this exercise will help you be more deliberate and controlled with your soft edges. Alright, so we've talked about now the marks you're going to have to make, how you want to be thinking about using them, and this will tie back into what I was just mentioning about what you want to be thinking about when doing an exercise. If you're struggling to make your fundamental marks, that's fine. Everybody's there at one point. So what you need to do is when you sit down to practice and you feel like they're lacking, you need to focus on making your fundamental marks. And I know it sounds obvious when you put it like that, but a lot of the times you'll be just sketching whatever, and if you don't have a solid idea, if you don't have something that you already want to make, then you can use this time to focus on making sure that your fundamental marks, hard edges, soft edges, and lines, are actually communicating something. Instead of thinking about, oh, what are the proportions supposed to look like, or oh, what outfit should the character be wearing, or whatever, think, is this line clear in what it's supposed to be? Even if it's supposed to be something bad and stupid, and that someone will definitely comment if you post it, that doesn't matter. What does matter is that when you do sit back and look at it, is everything where you wanted it to be, or at the very least, doing what it should be doing, defining either an edge, a transition, or a form, which is also the same one, actually. And you can use this logic to approach learning any subject without ever having to properly sit down and study. Just think, I want to draw a thing, and then choose something to focus on getting correct. If you want to draw people, don't start with anatomy, because that's complicated and there's a lot there. Start with, I want to draw people, and then focus on representing the 3D forms of a person, right? The torso, the arm as a cylinder. You've heard all this before from people that are way better and smarter than me. But what a lot of the times they leave out is that focused practice on what you're weak in. And as a beginner, most of the time what you're weak in is making the marks that you want represent the thing you want. Because obviously everybody as a beginner sits back, looks at their work, looks at somebody good and thinks, wow, this is terrible, what do I do to fix it? And a lot of the times you'll narrow in on microscopic things like their software or their shading techniques or their workflow or whatever. I did the same thing, and I'm pretty sure everybody does it. But the macroscopic stuff that really is only visible during the sketch phase is what you need to focus on. How are they defining forms? How are they making their image read clearly? And you look at somebody really good, and they can skip all of this construction garbage. They don't need to use their simple shapes. But that's because they've developed a sort of visual shorthand for it, right? If you look at a manga artist, when they draw their eyes, they draw their little manga eyes, and it looks like an eye, and in what we understand an eye to be. But there's so much subtlety going on in a good minimalist style, right? Like the reason the top eyelid is thicker than the bottom one is not just a stylistic choice, but it helps it read as catching more shadow than the other side facing up. And if you look at manga where there's a dramatic sequence, a lot of the time the light is coming from down here, so they'll do something like this where the bags under the eyes get incredibly dark, the top gets receded and less lit, and the nose gets lighter and darker on top, right? Something simple, and these are simple icons, but they're designed to make the actual image read with light and form. Oh, look at this guy, he looks fucking terrible. But with these things in mind, when you sit down to approach a drawing, you can start looking at what are the fundamental skills that I want to focus on improving. Because if you pick one, something simple and easy, and have the tools to actually represent them comfortably in your muscle memory, then studying anything becomes pretty easy. I'll take some time at a different time to talk about the primitive shapes. At the end of the day, drawing boxes and cones and cylinders and shit all in perspective, or at the very least approximating a decent looking perspective, is an important exercise, but it's boring. And so I'll dedicate a separate video to talking about how you want to do that. But the point is that this is step one, and most people, even really, really good artists, or not really, really good, but even talented artists who've been working at it for a long time, a lot of the times don't have this down in their sketching, and you'll hear them talk about it. They say that, the sketching part is their least favorite part. It's the hardest for them, because that's the problem-solving phase. And without good shorthand tools for problem-solving quickly, it's going to look bad. I don't know if any of you have ever watched an animatic for a piece of either cartoon or film. You can see the energy that comes through in these really minimalist and quickly done scenes that are supposed to represent something big and complex. And that's because, most of these artists have been drawing storyboards or animatics for years, and so they have the shorthand in their muscle memory to represent complex ideas simply. And after that, making them more complex and fleshing them out and polishing them is just a matter of time. Then that time will get shorter as you study and improve. But getting your fundamental marks down and then being able to, without any effort, without having to sit down and think about it or plot perspective grids, be able to apply them to interesting and believable 3D forms that are properly done, is how you will improve fast. Because it will give you the tools to study anything. And you can go from no knowledge on a particular subject, be it characters or objects or creatures or weapons or whatever, to being able to represent them at least passably in no time. Because at the end of the day, they are all the same thing. It is a series of clarifying marks applied to a series of properly constructed 3D forms that give you the framework for all of the polish and finish that you see on Twitter. So I do hope this was helpful in some way. If you have any questions, leave them in the comments section below. Like, comment, subscribe, all that garbage, because if I don't do that, the YouTube algorithm is going to shoot me at dawn. Anyway, guys, thanks for watching. Bye.